Okay, so good morning and welcome back to Classical Mechanics 1. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, we can. Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please speak up. Yes.
Sir, I had a doubt from the last class.
May I know your name?
So my name is Shubham Kumar.
All right.
Sir, I had a doubt in you taught in the last class about why position is not really a vector and why velocity is a vector. I mean, I wanted to know that why this self-defining an origin plays, what role does it play in like being a vector or not?
Yeah. So as we introduced vectors as arrows, I mean, as arrows pointing from an origin to a particular location, they do require some kind of base point, some kind of origin. So it's part of their definition. So think about your home in which town do you come from?
Sir, Patna.
Patna. Okay, so your home in Patna is located somewhere, right, on some street. Now, it doesn't require an arrow to specify its location. It doesn't require any origin. On the other hand, if you look at the infinitesimal change in your home as it moves to the next home, or you move from one home to the next home, that does define a vector, because you've got your original location and your neighbor's home that you're going to. So that is the spirit in which the location of a particle does not in itself define any origin. It's not a vector, whereas an infinitesimal change in its location, or your attempt to go from your home to your neighbor's home does involve a vectorial process. I mean, an initial and a final location. Does that clarify things a little bit?
Yes, I mean, like, is this origin is needed like for defining a particular direction in that sense, but like if we assume a velocity, I mean, for a fixed frame, I mean, for this origin thing, we already have a coordinate frame in which we are talking. So,
okay,
like,
1 second. I'd like to clarify that point. See, for our convenience, we are free to pick some kind of origin. Yeah. The question is, does that concept, does the physical concept require an origin, sort of self-define its own origin? As opposed to an origin that we choose. So, okay, your town, Patna, has some kind of Gandhi Maidan or something, or some special location which you may choose as the origin of your coordinate system, but that still is an arbitrary choice you have made. It is not something that your home intrinsically possesses. This is the distinction. The location, the instantaneous location of a particle does not in itself define any origin.
Yes, sir. I mean, like that. The thing which you said now, like, this self-defined. I mean, self-defined origin is there for a displacement.
Yes.
That I was asking. I mean, why is it important? And like, it is for defining a direction.
Yeah. Wait. No, I don't want to say that it is important. Not in your home location is important to you, no matter whether you go to your neighbor's house. Yeah, so it is not a question of importance. These are different physical concepts. The location and a vector, these are different concepts. They are both important. The location is absolutely the basic thing. Without knowing your home, you cannot go to your neighbor's home. So let us look at it that way.
Yes, I'm understanding that. I mean, like, location does not need an origin.
Yes.
Whereas this displacement describes like a small infinitesimal change describes an origin. I mean, I was talking about like that only. I mean, why does even having an origin changes the fact that in a coordinate frame that position is not really a vector, and whereas I mean, if for velocity we are defining an origin and a direction, like we could take a frame a moving frame in which the direction is like changed. So that direction.
Okay. No, see, part of this is, see, we need to classify objects, and things that are physically similar we put in one box, and things which are dissimilar we put in different boxes for our convenience. That is all we are doing. You are free to define an origin like Gandhi Maidan and draw a vector from there to your house, and that does define a vector, and you can call that the position vector of your home. That is an excellent thing to do, and we will often do that. It is just that your home does not intrinsically come with the specification of an origin or the notion of a vector. Yeah. So let me. Yeah, these things will become clearer if you let go a little bit of working in R3 or R2, the plane, because these are somewhat artificial spaces, oversimplified spaces. Yeah, suppose you have a particle moving on a circle. Now, the location on the circle is simply the location on the circle. It is not to be thought of as a vector from anywhere. The center of the circle is not part of the circle by any means. Yeah. On the other hand, a small movement of the particle from one point on the circle to the neighboring point does define a vector. So this is the essential difference. Let me perhaps, I mean, this is an important point, so maybe it is worth drawing a picture to further clarify. But please, some feedback from you on whether I am helping you or not.
Yes, sir. I got some of your points.
Okay. Okay, great. So here is a little picture I have. Oh, I have to tell my pen to write, which I hope it will do. One second, I am. My pen was writing, but right now it is not writing. Okay, we shall do something about this. Okay, while I do try to fix that, the point is that if you are moving on a circle, the points on the circle are simply points on the circle. The center of the circle or any other point on the plane is not part of the circle. So there is no question of thinking of your location of the circle as a vector from the origin of the circle, from the center of the circle. If you do that, that is your convenience. And we will often do that and simply define a position vector from the center of the circle to the point on the rim. But that is not intrinsically associated to the location of the particle. On the other hand, a little movement of the particle from one point on the circle to the neighboring point does define a vector. This is the essential point. Okay. Yeah. Any further question while I fix my pen problem? You can ask this question once again later as well. Yeah.
Sir, you said any infinitesimal displacement is a vector. So my question is, why does it a vector? Like you said, location of object is not a vector. So why does it is a vector? Like displacement is a vector.
Why is the displacement a vector? Okay, so look, a displacement, you start on one point on a circle, you move to a neighboring point. Now, you have the concept of tangent vector to a curve, in this case, a circle. That is the vector we're talking about. That velocity vector is simply a tangent vector to the circle. Its length we assign according to the speed of the particle. So that's where this vector is coming from. If you've heard of tangent vectors, this should be nothing new. Does that clarify something?
So I have.
Yeah, by the way, who asked this question just now?
Sakti.
Okay, Shakti Chauhan, fine. All right. Yes, good morning, Gautam Vishwanathan. Fine. Yeah, I am still trying to figure out how my pen works.
I have another question.
Yes, who is that?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir, I'm Ripunjay.
Ripunjay, fine. Yeah, please
sir,
go
my
ahead.
question is basically like, Sir, it's in the same context. Sir, when we talk of a position vector from an origin, it's more or less like it's basically from a point that we are talking of another point. It's a relationship between one point with the origin, right? Like that is the idea.
Sorry,
And
just a
because the
second.
origin is fixed, this relationship is like.
No, could you please repeat your question? I did not catch the drift.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, what I was asking is, when we speak of position vector, all we are saying is relationship of a point with respect to the origin, right? The origin that we have chosen with our frame.
Yes.
Sir, so when a particle is moving, so basically when I am at a point A, let's say I'm at a particular point, and when I am in motion, so I go to another point.
Yes.
Basically some infinitesimal displacement happens. So isn't it like, so basically displacement vector is relationship of the next point with my current location. So how
That's
is
true.
it not a moving frame? So isn't it like a moving frame with respect to which we are making measurements of the displacement vector?
Yeah, you're correct. But see, look, we are looking at one instant of time. Yeah, before we go to moving frames and so on, we are looking at one instant of time. So we start at a particular location, and we let us try to do this again. We start at a particular instant of time. Here is my trajectory. My particle is over here. Particle begins here. It moves to a neighboring location here. Now, the displacement defines a little arrow, a little vector. Now,
yes, so basic.
And we are not changing the initial instant of time just yet. That is remaining fixed. Okay. So that fixes your origin, your current location. If you go to a new location after some time and make a small displacement from there, then the origin would have changed to that current location. So in that sense, you have to move the origin with the particle. So the velocity vector has an origin, self-defined origin that moves with the particle. To that extent, you are correct.
Yes, sir. But the reason why I was asking this is because so isn't this is also like the position vector, right? It's just that it is just that position vector. It is a position vector from a moving origin. So like if position vector is not a full-fledged vector, so how can this be a full-fledged vector?
Oh,
because
wait. No, look, these are really different things. The velocity vector is, see, there are different things. The position vector changes with time, you're right. It is with respect to some convenient origin that we choose, which may even hold fixed. Yeah, I mean, this is my fixed origin, which is for convenience chosen that way. Now, the velocity vector is quite different. It is some difference quotient that is tending to zero as time goes to zero and so on. So the entire process of defining it is different. Yeah, see, once we choose an origin, the position of the particle does become a vector. I don't deny that. Yeah, and we do use it. So once that is done, that is a legitimate vector and we will use it. In fact, the velocity vector is the time derivative of that vector. So you are correct. Once we have chosen origin, we have a position vector. It is a legitimate vector. Its derivative is the velocity vector. No difference.
Sir, and I had another question.
Yes.
So like you, in the last class, you said
Sorry,
that
you are Ripunjay,
position is something that is a...
Once again, your name is Ripunjay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please go on. No, full name.
Ripunjay Dwivedi, yeah.
Dwivedi, fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So yeah, sir, in the last class, you said that basically like the position of a particle is a physical fact. It exists in itself without, even if we don't need to mention a reference point for that position. But isn't position defined based on relative measurements? Because my position is defined with respect to something.
Yeah, but it's with respect to other physical objects. It is not with respect to an arbitrary choice of what I choose to be the origin and so on. We regard the presence of Jupiter or the sun as physical facts, and yes, we locate Mars relative to those. That's all I was saying. Yeah.
So our origin is a mathematical fact, arbitrary, like a mathematical fact, right?
Yes. To choose my origin at the center of the sun is a matter of convenience. It's a mathematical convenience. The presence of the sun itself is not. It is a physical feature.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sure. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah, I mean, this is a subtle point, so it is well worth going through. I am glad that you are all raising it. Any other questions? Okay, so let me just recall from last class what we were saying towards the very end. It is that the velocity of a particle is a vector. It is the time derivative of the position vector along the trajectory. So once we choose an origin for our place, then the position vector is defined, and then v of t is simply dr dt. Okay, so we are free to work with that. Now this defines a vector that points from the instantaneous location of the particle in the direction of motion, as described in this figure. Moreover, geometrically, it is a tangent vector to the trajectory. Its magnitude is called the instantaneous speed of the particle. All right. Now, the origin from which the velocity vector points moves with the particle. This is what we were describing in this figure. Now, for many purposes, it is convenient to resolve the velocity vector along the Cartesian coordinate axis that we had conveniently chosen previously. But since the origin of that Cartesian coordinate system was somewhere else and not at the current location of the particle, we will, for our convenience and for this purpose, move the origin of the Cartesian frame to the current location of the particle. When we do that, we will get a Cartesian frame that is parallel to the original one. So the original one, we will simply move it there. And having moved it, we can look at the components of the velocity vector in that frame, which is located at the particle's instantaneous position. With this understanding, the velocity can be written as a set of three components: x dot, y dot, z dot, where x, y, and z are the instantaneous Cartesian coordinates of the particle. And we will also denote this velocity vector as x dot x hat plus y dot y hat plus z dot z hat. So this is just a summary of what we have been saying. Now, having developed this velocity vector, so yeah, I hope you are getting used to this. We have a fixed Cartesian frame with some arbitrary origin far away. We also have a moving Cartesian frame, which is oriented in exactly the same way, but located or centered at the point we wish, namely the location of the particle at the instant considered. Right? So these two, we will switch back and forth between these. And there is nothing wrong with this. We will do it as long as it is useful. Now, the time derivative of the velocity vector is defined as the acceleration. And this may be viewed as the vector, which is simply given by taking one more time derivative. By the way, this over dot notation goes back to Newton, and it simplifies formulae a great deal. So A of t is defined as x double dot x hat plus y double dot of t y hat plus z double dot of t z hat. Okay. And as you are familiar, the acceleration vector is the limit of the difference quotient v of t plus delta t minus v of t divided by delta t, as delta t goes to 0. And we will regard the acceleration vector as a vector emanating from the instantaneous location of the particle. Okay. Because v itself was a vector emanating from the current location of the particle. So v itself is here. V of t plus delta t is over here. All right. And as delta t goes to 0, both of them have a common origin, or at least in the limit. And therefore, their difference is another vector with that same origin in the limit. And that vector, when you divide it by delta t less than delta t to 0, will be called the acceleration vector. So we will regard the acceleration vector as a vector pointing from the instantaneous location of the particle. Okay. So Siddhant Shah says, sir, maybe in your PDF app, you just need to click on the pencil icon to turn it on. Okay, yeah, well, I was able to do that. I unplugged and inserted the pencil in the iPad. So it did work. Thank you. Okay,
So
so
sorry
yes,
to interrupt
please.
again, but just the last time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, sir, I'm Ripunja again. So like what I am understanding is, so sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir, am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go
Yes,
ahead,
sir. So
Ripunjay.
basically, yes, sir. So the displacement vector is kind of a position vector, but this position vector has origin associated with the particle. Now the particle can be at any other point, like can be at any point in the space. So this displacement vector is free to be defined at every point, and that is what separates it from the position vector, which is defined from the origin, which cannot be at any other point because the origin is chosen to be fixed. So that is how this is a more like a free vector kind of thing.
Okay, sure. Yeah, if you like, that is a reasonable way of thinking. The origin for the position vector does not keep on changing. You are right. That has been chosen as Gandhi Maidan. Yes, but the origin for the velocity vector keeps changing with the current location of the particle. So there is one distinction there. The origin for the acceleration vector also keeps changing with the current location of the particle. These are all correct statements.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
You are welcome. Any other question about this matter? Okay, so let us proceed to an example of a kind of motion that is quite common, namely, or at least simple and helpful to think in terms of uniform circular motion. All right, so suppose a particle moves counterclockwise on the circle x squared plus y squared equal to L squared of radius L in the xy plane at a constant angular speed omega radians per second. So we want to model such a motion. See, we are not describing here how this motion came about or who, what is the force that is responsible for it and so on. We will discuss that later on. But we just want to study how we would just describe such a motion in the first place, if we were to observe such a thing happening. Now, assuming that the particle starts from the point L comma 0. So let me draw that circle. Here it is. The radius is L, and this is the point L comma 0. This point is the point 0 comma L, and so on. Yeah. Now, so assuming it starts at the point L comma 0, x comma y equal to L comma 0 at t equal to 0, its instantaneous location may be given by the Cartesian coordinates r of t equal to an ordered pair. And I'm sure you have seen this formula, or if you haven't, we will justify this formula in a moment. R of t, the x coordinate is given by L cosine omega t, and y coordinate is given by L sine omega t. All right. So at any instant of time, let us look at this picture. The particle is located at some point on the circle, a distance L from the origin, and the radius vector of the particle is defined with respect to the center of the circle. That vector is called boldface R, or R with an arrow, and it has the components x of t comma y of t. Now x and y are the x and y coordinates of this point. So this is x of t, and this is y of t. They of course change with time. And the position vector subtends an angle with the horizontal given by omega t. All right, so this is the setup. And using basic trigonometry, you notice that x of t is going to be given by L cosine omega t, and y of t is going to be given by L sine of omega t. Right. So using this, we put it together and get the position vector of the particle with respect to the center of the circle. Yeah, so this is the position vector with respect to center of circle. Yeah, so you notice I have to be precise. I have to say position vector with respect to center of the circle. You may have chosen some other origin, like the north pole of the circle or the eastern part of the circle and so on. On the other hand, when I say velocity vector of the particle, I don't need to say with respect to which origin and so on. That the particle itself was chosen for me. Okay, so there is the difference in the vocabulary. Yeah, so let me go to the previous page as requested by Satya Srivani. Yeah, what is it you would like to know? Okay. Thank you, you say. Well, good.
Sir, I just wanted to see the line again of suppose a particle moves. I just wanted to go through the line once again. That's it.
Oh, yes. Yes, no problem. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I go a little bit fast. Please do slow me down. Yeah. Okay. I think I should scroll slowly as well. All right. So you notice the change in vocabulary. I say position vector with respect to some place. I just say velocity vector. I don't need to say with respect to what. It is self-defined. Okay. Now, well, a couple of lines of justification for this formula. In fact, I already did that. We will simply notice that x squared plus y squared is L squared because sine squared plus cosine squared is 1 at all times. And furthermore, the motion is counterclockwise. That is quite important. Yeah, as t increases, from t equal to 0, you will notice the sine increases and becomes positive, whereas the cosine starts at 1 and decreases. Yeah, so that the x coordinate is going to decrease and the y coordinates are going to increase, and therefore the motion is counterclockwise. Yeah, please tell me how I can modify this formula to describe a particle that is moving clockwise.
So minus omega t.
Sure. Okay. So I will simply replace omega by minus omega in the formula. You're right. So that is Siddhant, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Siddhant Shah. Fine. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any question at this stage? Now, let us compute the velocity vector for this particle that is executing uniform circular motion. As we have described previously in general, the velocity vector is given by the time derivative of the position vector. So you simply differentiate in time this formula, and you're going to get minus L omega sine omega t x hat plus L omega cosine omega t y hat. So this is the velocity vector. Yeah, so that is simple differentiation. We will examine this vector in more detail momentarily. Now, the speed of the particle denoted by a v without any boldface is defined as the magnitude of this vector, v vector. So it is given by the square root or the sum of the squares of the two components, x and y components. Yeah, so in this case, it is given by L squared omega squared. So v squared. By v squared, I really mean v dot v. V dot v. So that's going to be L squared omega squared sine squared plus L squared omega squared cosine squared. So that is simply L squared omega squared. And when I take a square root, I'll get L omega. Yeah. So here I am assuming that omega is positive because we said that the particle is moving counterclockwise. So I have assumed this omega is positive. Otherwise, I have to put an absolute value sign beside omega. And furthermore, omega was assumed to be a constant. And from that, I mean, otherwise, I have to differentiate omega as well. Otherwise, this is not describing uniform circular motion. So I'm assuming that omega is constant. Yeah, and you immediately see how you can generalize this to non-constant circular motion. Well, you just have to allow omega itself to depend on time. And then the formula for velocity will change because there will be omega dot terms as well. Yeah, let us not do that for now. So we see here that the speed is constant, which ensures uniform circular motion. In fact, the particle goes around the circle once in a time given by, well, let us compute the time. The circumference of the circle is given by 2 pi L, and the speed of the particle is v. So the ratio 2 pi L upon v is the angular speed. Is the time taken. Yeah. So that when you substitute for v as L omega, the L's cancel and you get 2 pi upon omega. So the time period is equal to 2 pi upon the angular frequency. So omega is called the angular frequency. By the way, while I went ahead and answered questions and so on, I did not ask if the previous lecture ended on time, or are people still listening to some answers from Professor Karandikar? What is the status of that?
Sir, the lecture definitely ended on time, but we asked a few questions like after the lecture also. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, sir. Thank you, Anand Baliwada. Anek to everyone, not a doubt. Also, Professor, we are still stuck in the 9:41 a.m. moment on 9 January. Yes, you are quite right. I do not know the reason for this. This is a mystery that you shall help me solve before the course ends, I hope. Okay.
Sir, I had a doubt. So we defined omega as the angular speed, omega radians per second. So shouldn't the time period be omega by 2 pi? Shouldn't the frequency be omega by 2 pi?
Yes. No. So, okay, we are not talked about frequency yet. We are talking about angular frequency. When we say angular frequency, we mean how much angle is covered per unit time, and that angle is measured in radians. So radians per second, if you wish. Now, time period is measured in seconds, so it has to go reciprocally with omega, and we have just shown that it's 2 pi upon omega. You are talking about some other concept, I presume?
No, sir, you've written omega is equal to angular frequency, so I got confused between that and frequency.
Okay. There's another concept called frequency, not angular frequency, but simply frequency, which is sometimes denoted nu. Perhaps that is what you are referring to. And omega, which is the angular frequency, is defined as 2 pi nu. So nu is what you measure in hertz. It is also having the same dimension of per second, but not radians per second. Okay, so there is a conversion factor of 2 pi between frequency and angular frequency. We are here talking about angular frequency. Is that related to what you are asking?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. All right, that is Siddhant Shah. Fine. Shakti Chauhan is asking a question. We were searching for you in the WhatsApp group, Anek. Oh, okay. Well, perhaps that is not relevant to the class here. Okay, so now let me move forward. Now let us look at a couple of features of this formula we have derived for the velocity. In particular, which way does it point? Now, the velocity and position vector have both been given here. So we are free to compute the angle between them. For instance, let us compute their dot product. If their dot product vanishes, we will conclude that they are orthogonal or perpendicular to each other. And that is indeed the case. If I compute the dot product, V dot R, the two terms cancel out. Basically get minus sine theta cosine theta plus cosine theta sine theta, where theta is omega t. Okay, so V dot R is simply 0. So I encourage you to check that. And that is also kind of geometrically clear, because the velocity vector in this case is tangent to the circle. And the radius vector is along the radius, and not surprisingly, they are orthogonal to each other. All right. So this is a special feature of rotation. We will say a lot more about that. Now, having obtained the velocity vector, we can go one step further and compute the acceleration vector A, which is v dot. Taking one more time derivative, I'm going to get one more factor of omega outside. One more factor of omega outside. So it becomes minus L omega squared cosine omega t x hat minus L omega squared sine omega t y hat. Okay, so I encourage you to check that when I differentiate this formula once more in time. And now comparing this with my original radius vector, which was given by cosine x hat plus sine y hat, we notice, sorry, L times that, sorry, L times cosine plus L times sine. We notice that the acceleration vector is proportional to the radius vector, is proportional to the position vector with a constant of proportionality minus omega squared. All right. So this is a nice observation. We see that the acceleration has a constant magnitude, namely omega squared. Okay, there's a question from Ankit Gayan. Sir, is omega the angular frequency the same as angular velocity? Yes. Yeah. Okay. I mean, so the angular velocity is actually a vector, so we will need to give it a direction, but its magnitude is the angular frequency. So yeah, you are on the right track. but to be a little precise, the angular velocity is a vector, so I need to give it a direction. Sure. Okay. So now we have observed that the acceleration vector has a constant magnitude, namely omega squared. Now, please tell me, what is the...
Sir, sorry to interrupt, but wouldn't the magnitude be omega square L?
You are quite right. I was just going to observe that this is wrong. Thank you for pointing that out. A of t is equal to minus L omega squared. Sorry, the magnitude of A of t is L omega squared. You're quite right. Well, okay, so let's see why I went wrong, or how I could have checked this. What is the dimension? I've not spoken about dimensions, but I think you all know something about that. What is the dimension of the position vector, or just the x component thereof? What kind of dimension would you like to assign to it? Length. Good.
Okay.
Now, the velocity, we would like to assign a dimension of what?
Length, time inverse.
Yeah, length per unit time. And taking one more time derivative, the dimension of acceleration should be length per unit time squared. All right, and no wonder. And by the way, what's the dimension of omega?
Time to the
Time
power
inverse.
-2.
Yeah, the inverse time,
Sorry,
because it was
time,
radians per second. Yeah, I mean, it was how much angle is it changes per unit time, how much the angle changes per unit time. Yeah, so indeed I was missing an L in the formula for the magnitude of A. Okay, thank you for correcting me. Okay, so now let us give a name to this acceleration. We have observed that the acceleration points opposite to the radius vector. In other words, the acceleration points radially inwards towards the center of the circle. All right, towards the center of the circle. Now, this latter feature justifies the name centripetal acceleration. So in Latin, centri is center and petal is towards. So this is towards the center, or towards, or seeking the center. Yeah, so that is the reason for this name, centripetal acceleration. So let me just summarize it through this figure. The velocity, the radius vector points radially outward from the center of the circle, which is our choice of origin, to the point on the rim where the particle is currently located. Since the particle is moving counterclockwise, the velocity vector is tangent to the circle and pointing towards Punjab, at least from my location. And we say that the velocity vector points azimuthally. So this is a new word for some of you. This is the word given to this direction. We will define it more carefully shortly when I introduce polar coordinates, but we will use the term velocity points azimuthally for such a situation. It is also called tangential. Now the acceleration we have just observed points radially inward and is given the name centripetal acceleration towards the center of the circle.
Sir,
Yes.
so how is acceleration minus omega square L into radius vector? There's already a dimension of radius of length in the radius vector.
Yeah, okay. So I have unnecessarily confused everybody. Now, the acceleration vector is not L times omega squared times R.
Magnitude. Right.
Yeah, it's only the magnitude of A. Yeah, the point is that the magnitude of L is itself, sorry, the magnitude of R is itself L, and therefore that L came. Is this matter cleared?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that was Srimati Srikanth. Fine. Any other question about this uniform circular motion that we have just described?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is Ishan Banerjee. Is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, actually, can you just explain the azimuthal the velocity once more?
Yeah. So all I said is that we have observed by calculating v dot r equal to 0, we have observed that v is orthogonal to the radius vector. All right. Now, because the motion is counterclockwise, v points this way as opposed to this way. Okay, there are only two possibilities for a vector orthogonal to r. Since it is counterclockwise, this one is eliminated. Now, we want to give a name to a vector that points tangent to a circle. Yeah. And that name is called azimuthal. That is all. All right. I will explain in a bit more detail what we mean by azimuthal later on this class or next class. But for now, it is simply a name for the tangential direction to a circle. All right. That is all it is. Yeah. It is simply a name for now. But it is so widely used that we better get used to it. Okay, so now so much for uniform circular motion. Now we would like to abstract a few features from here and talk about a few generalities. Okay, Ishan says, okay, sir. So yes, thank you for clarifying. Okay, so now I will speak briefly about rotating vectors, very briefly. Now, what we observed just now is that the velocity of a uniformly rotating particle is orthogonal to its radius vector. Okay. In other words, the time derivative of the position vector r was perpendicular to r itself, namely r dot dr dt or r dot v was 0. Okay. Now, as we will now demonstrate, this is true even if the rotation is not uniform. I mean, this should perhaps already be obvious to you, but let us just go through it. That this is true even if the rotation is not uniform, and let us comment on the significance of this observation. Now, suppose A is any vector. In your mind, you can think of it as a position vector, but it need not be that. See, later on, we might choose if we think of it as momentum or angular momentum or other such things. Yeah, or even magnetic field and such things. But for now, let us suppose that A is any vector such that, by the way, I wanted to say something earlier. So let me take a step back. So just one more remark. Yeah. I did not tell you what the reason for this particle going around the circle was. I just said it is going around the circle. Now you may wonder why it's going around the circle or who made it go that way and so on. So let us, for just a brief moment, in physics, okay, Shakti Chauhan is asking, in physics, we consider a particle as a point object, how can it possess rotation? Well, okay, I think perhaps I misspoke. all I meant is that the particle is going around a circle. It is still very much a point particle. Yeah, so I'm not saying the particle is rotating about itself or anything of that sort. I'm just saying the particle goes around a circle. That is the sense in which it is rotating or going around a circle. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Yeah, so now I just want to take a moment to comment on suppose the reason for this particle going around the circle. Now, I'm not giving full details, but suppose the reason for this particle going around the circle is the presence of some kind of force inward toward the center. Yeah, we've not talked about forces very much, but one does have a little bit of experience from playing around. Suppose you had a stone tied to a string, and one end of the string you hold in your hand and the other end is left free, and you sort of rotate the string so that the stone goes round and round. Yeah, now of course this is a rather specific situation, but from that I want to just abstract one possibility where there is a force towards the center that somehow is making this particle grow around a circle. All right. How that happens, there are many ways, one of which I just now described, yeah, where you tug at a string, the other end of which is attached to a stone. And then the string points radially outwards, and you are tugging at it radially inwards. Okay. There are other ways this could happen. You could have Earth in a circular orbit around the sun or something like that, and there may be some radially inward force that is causing some motion or is involved in that motion. Yeah, but suppose there is a force that is radially inward, and the particle is executing uniform circular motion as we have just described. In such a situation, if we compute the dot product of the force, which is radially inward, and the infinitesimal displacement ds, all right. So the force is inward, let us suppose, and the displacement over a small instant of time I will call ds. These two are orthogonal to each other because the motion is circular. Then this quantity f dot ds will be called the infinitesimal work done. Yeah. So this is the infinitesimal work done by the force on the particle in moving it from r to r plus r of t to r of t plus delta t. We notice that this is equal to 0 for circular motion. All right. So this is just a simple observation here, that if we were to define the work as f dot ds, then for circular motion where the force is radially inward, the work done is 0. Okay. So we will just bear this observation in mind for future reference. Now, of course, it is not as though only radially inward forces are associated with circular motion. There are other ways to make things go around a circle, like you keep a ball on this rim, you stand behind the ball and keep on pushing it. You also go around, the ball also goes down. Yeah, so that is also an excellent way to produce some circular motion. Yeah, and in that case, the force is not orthogonal to the infinitesimal displacement. In fact, the force may be pointing in the direction of the displacement. You see, so depending on how the force is and what causes that force and motion, the work done is different. So if you are running behind the ball and pushing it, you will be doing some work. Okay, so this is just a brief observation that I want to keep in mind for later use. Okay, so now I'm sorry, I got a little, I had to take a step back. Let me come back to this general discussion. We were saying, suppose A is any vector such that its time derivative is orthogonal to itself. Okay? So this is a very specific assumption that A dot is perpendicular to A vector. Suppose that is the case. So this is my A vector. And then because A dot is perpendicular to A and A dot points the direction of infinitesimal change in A in a short interval of time, it means that the infinitesimal change in A in a short time is perpendicular to A and has no component along A. So this would be the infinitesimal change in A. So whenever this condition is satisfied, namely when A dot dotted with A is 0, if this is 0, then the magnitude of A cannot change because there is no change in A in that direction. It is only orthogonal to that. So in other words, under such circumstances, the magnitude of A cannot change and the vector can only rotate. All right. Now let us obtain a formula for the rate of change of A under these circumstances. Right. A little exercise. I mean, I already said that there is some A dot which is perpendicular to A, but I would like to get a formula for it to the extent possible, or at least the magnitude of dA dt. So let us see how we reason. Now the change in the vector A is given by the vector at the subsequent instant of time minus the vector at the original instant of time. So A of t plus delta t minus A of t. This is the infinitesimal change in A. Now, since the length of A, we have just argued that the length of A does not change, it follows that the three vectors A of t plus delta t, and delta A form an isosceles triangle. All right, an isosceles triangle with delta A as base. So this picture is supposed to illustrate this. I have A at the first instant of time, this one, and A at the next instant of time, a subsequent instant of time. They are of the same length because we just argued that there is no component of change in the direction of A. And then finally, you have the displacement vector or the change in vector A, delta A. So this is an isosceles triangle. And now we can compute the length of delta A. Suppose the angle through which A has rotated is delta theta. So this is the angle delta theta. Then using trigonometry, we conclude that delta A in magnitude is twice this length, So it is twice A times sine of delta theta upon 2. So delta theta upon 2 is this angle. The sine of that angle gives you that. So now approximating the sine function by the argument of the sine function for small angles, we get that delta A in magnitude is A delta theta for small rotations. All right. Now dividing by the time during which this happened, namely computing dA dt, we find that the magnitude of dA dt is equal to A times d theta by dt. Okay, I've just divided this equation, divide by delta t and let delta t go to 0. Okay, so here we have now a relation. Okay, first of all, we observed that d theta dt is the angular speed, which previously we had called omega. Yeah, the rate of change of angle. So now here we have a nice formula that says that the rate of change, at least the magnitude of the rate of change of A, is given by the magnitude of A itself times omega. Right. So this is a nice little result. Let us apply this to circular motion, where we take A vector as the radius vector itself. And if so, dA dt would simply be dr dt, which is the velocity. All right. Then the
Sir, in the above case, I mean the case we are discussing, this is a circular motion itself, right? Till now, the isosceles triangle formation.
Yeah. In other words, the locus of the tip of the A vector is a circle. Yeah. Now, The thing is that we are not saying that the A vector is the position vector of the particle. It could be something else. Yeah. Now we are specializing.
Okay, sir.
That is all. Yeah. So
Sir,
that
so
was.
does that one condition will imply that the locus of point, the position vector A is a circle, that A dot A is equal
Is zero.
to that
Precisely,
condition?
precisely. Yeah. Yes, you are quite right. Any vector which is orthogonal to its time derivative will be such that the locus of its tip goes around a circle. That's all. And that vector only suffers rotation, not elongation or contraction. Does that address your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And are you, this is Saptarshi Sadhukan, is it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Fine. Who spoke before that? Was that Neelabji Das? I forgot.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Fine. While you learn physics, I'll also learn some physics, but I also intend to learn all 84 names of the students in this class. Okay. So now, yes, what is the question?
I had a question. So I understood the spirit of this argument, but I had a question. So if we're given a vector and the infinitesimal displacement, or rather if we're given a vector that's orthogonal to A, when we add the two, why is it necessary that A's magnitude does not change? Is it always true, or is it only for the infinitesimal case?
Okay. No, this is true for infinitesimal changes.
Okay.
Yeah, I should clarify. Yeah. So I have a vector A and I make an infinitesimal change in A, which has a component in the direction of A or opposite to A, then the length of A will change. However, if I make an infinitesimal change that is orthogonal to A, you will notice that it doesn't change. And this is specific to infinitesimal changes, not to finite changes.
Okay, got it, sir. Thank you.
You are welcome. Neelabji Das. Or no, this is Gautam Vishwanathan. Who spoke?
Yes, sir. This was Gautam.
Okay, fine. All right. So now we have observed that applying this discussion to the case of circular motion, that dA dt is simply velocity, and the linear speed of the particle is the magnitude of that velocity, which would then be given by A times the magnitude of d theta dt. So A has here become R, and d theta dt in magnitude is called omega, and therefore we come to the conclusion that the velocity of a particle, the speed of a particle going around a circle is given by R times omega, okay, where omega is the angular speed. V is the linear speed, omega is the angular speed. This is for circular motion. Okay. Now, of course, all of these could depend on time, both V and omega, but R is assumed not to depend on time, because we said that the length of that vector R does not change with time. Okay. Furthermore, omega is positive for counterclockwise motion. As I just said, V and omega need not be constant. They could depend on time. It can be non-uniform circular motion. Uniform circular motion is the special case where omega is constant. Okay. In which case we had an explicit formula. I mean, this formula is true even if omega is not constant, but I just recall the formula which we had written previously, that R is equal to the magnitude of R, namely just ordinary R cosine omega t x hat plus sine omega t y hat, and V is as before. And we verify, of course, as we did previously, that V dot R is 0 and that V points tangentially or azimuthally while R is radial. And this ensured that the length of R does not change with time. What is more, we showed that the acceleration is itself perpendicular to velocity. That the acceleration points radial. I got ahead of myself, sorry. We showed previously for circular motion, uniform circular motion, that A equal to V dot is equal to minus omega squared R, so that V dot is perpendicular to V. Okay. So we have seen now that the velocity vector itself cannot change in magnitude and must also simply rotate. And I invite you to verify that the same is true of the acceleration vector also for uniform circular motion, that A also simply rotates. Its magnitude does not change.
Sir, so I had a question. So could you once again repeat how we arrived to the conclusion that V dot is centripetally, perpendicular to V? To that conclusion, how did we arrive to that conclusion?
Okay, so the question is, what is the assumption? We assumed uniform circular motion. So that was the previous discussion. Let me go back there. I hope I didn't confuse you. We assumed uniform circular motion, wrote down a formula for the radius vector, took its time derivative and got the velocity vector. And now we answer your question. How do you find that V is perpendicular to R? Compute the dot product and observe that it is 0.
Okay.
Yeah, that was all there was to it. Sorry,
sir,
before that, who asked this question?
Saptarshi
Sadhukan. Okay, yes. Yeah, and now we have Siddhant Shah speaking.
Yes, sir. Sir, you said key acceleration also rotates, right? So isn't that kind of obvious from the fact that it's a constant into the radial thing, right?
Sure, you are right. So you have quickly answered the question for yourself and for everybody else. Yeah. Yes, and you might also plot the velocity as a function of time and observe that the velocity also simply rotates. I invite you to do that. But you're quite right. The acceleration vector for uniform circular motion points radially inward and it rotates. See, there's a small point that, see, the origin for the acceleration vector changes with time, you see. So one needs to do a little bit of movement. Yeah, so over here, the acceleration was this way. Here, the acceleration was this way. And here, the acceleration was this way. Now, from this picture, it is not entirely clear that it simply rotates. You are supposed to move all these vectors to a common origin. Yeah, and that is parallel translate them to common origin and then observe that they rotate. Yeah, so modulo that little performance, you are quite right. It is much more clear that the radius vector simply rotates. It is less clear that the acceleration vector rotates or the velocity vector rotates. It just takes one more step. Okay, I hope that is adequate.
Yes.
Okay, great. That was Siddhant Shah. Yeah, I have a question from Apratim Ghosh. Not 84, more like 60. Okay, well, all right. You are making my job easier. I have to learn only 60 names, but I'm not very convinced about that. In case you are not aware, I take attendance in every lecture. And in my understanding, there are significantly more than 60 persons present. Okay, now let us move on to a slightly different topic, namely what we mean by kinematics and what I will mean by the integration of kinematical equations. Now, this is no big deal, but let us just introduce some terminology. All right, so now we will leave behind our circular motion for a moment, but no, Shakti Chauhan will not let me do so. He says, why can't the magnitude of velocity vector change? Because it depends on time, like non-uniform motion, then it will change. You are absolutely right. The magnitude of the velocity vector changes with time if it is non-uniform circular motion. It is only for uniform circular motion that the velocity vector has a common magnitude at all times. Your point is well taken. Is that what you are pointing out?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good point. Yes. Yes, so I was that last issue was only concerning uniform circular motion. It does not hold for non-uniform motion. Okay, now I intend to move to a slightly different concept. Now, as we will soon learn, if the forces on a particle are known, then it turns out that one may use Newton's second law, which I have not yet discussed, to find its acceleration. Okay, so this, in other words, if the forces on a particle are known, then one may use something called Newton's second law to find its acceleration. I mean, if you are smart enough or you get adequate help. Now, this process of going from the force to the acceleration is called the dynamical part of the problem of motion. This is called the dynamical part of the problem of motion, since it depends on the forces and interactions present. So dynamics has to do with forces, interactions between particles and such things, and how they cause motion. All right. Now, there is another part of the problem of motion called the kinematical part of the problem of motion, which is to determine the velocity of the particle and subsequently its trajectory, namely its position at all instants of time, from the knowledge of its acceleration. Okay, so we separate out the problem of dynamics into two parts, the problem of motion into two parts. Yeah, the dynamical part and the kinematical part. Now, this separation is not always done, but it is useful sometimes. So I am just introducing the terminology. So the kinematical part of the problem does not require knowledge of forces. Okay? Somebody gives you an acceleration. Your job is to somehow determine the trajectory. Okay? Now, this process is addressed or handled in the following manner. Suppose we are given the acceleration of a particle. Yeah, then the velocity must satisfy the differential equation dv dt equal to a of t. Yeah. This is actually three differential equations, one for the x component, y component, z component. So three equations, x, y, and z components. Now these are what type of differential equations? Can you give some?
Linear differential equations.
These are ordinary differential equations. Okay, that is just a name given to this. That t is the only variable being differentiated. We call it an ordinary differential equation. It's a system of three ordinary differential equations. A of t is a prescribed vector, and we are supposed to find v of t. Fortunately, it is easy to solve. Integrating the equation with respect to time from an initial instant of time t0 to the desired instant of time t, we get that v of t minus v of t0 is equal to the integral from t0 to t a of t prime dt prime. So t prime is a dummy variable of integration. And I have moved the v of t0 to the right hand side. Okay. So this is we observe that to do this integration, in addition to the knowledge of the acceleration, I mean, we need to know what the acceleration function is, otherwise we cannot do this integral, or rather the acceleration vector. In addition, we need an initial condition, namely the velocity at the initial instant of time, okay, in order to determine the velocity at time t. Okay. Yeah, so it's very important to notice that it is not enough to know the acceleration, you also need one initial condition. Now, the problem of determining velocity has been reduced to quadratures. We say the problem of determining velocity has been reduced to quadratures. Quadrature is an old name for integration. So we have reduced it to the evaluation of integral. namely 3 integrals, one for each of the 3 Cartesian components of velocity. All right. So that is the first step of the kinematical problem. The second step is going from velocity to position. That requires one more integration because we have to solve yet another system of 3 differential equations, ordinary differential equations, namely r dot is equal to v of t. In exactly the same way, we will say that r of t is equal to r of t naught plus integral t naught to t v of t prime dt prime. Okay. So we needed one set of initial conditions, namely v of t naught for the first integration. Now we need another set of initial conditions, r of t naught, for the second integration. So these are called initial conditions, ICs. In brief, you see, evaluating these integrals for a specific acceleration function or vector may or may not be feasible analytically. Okay, that is a separate question. But at least we have set it up. Now, you might ask, is there one example where you can do this explicitly? And indeed there is. We can quickly go through that. Yeah. But I want to just make a comment that the equation we originally wanted to solve, namely r double dot is equal to a, yeah, we have solved it in 2 steps. V dot equal to a and then r dot equal to v. Okay. So this equation was second order in time. 2 derivatives in time. And it is for that reason that we require 2 sets of initial conditions. Yeah. So the number of initial conditions is related to the order of the equation. Of course, here we have a system of 3 equations. Therefore, you need 6 initial conditions, namely the 3 components of initial velocity and the 3 components of initial location. 6 of them. Yeah. R of t naught and V of t naught. Okay. Okay. So I hope this is clear to you. We have just introduced a new word called quadrature, which is the process of performing integrations. I would like to point out that solving differential equations is a difficult subject. It's a very difficult subject. Mechanics naturally leads you to such problems. And the sad thing is that the solution of differential equations cannot always be reduced to integration. Okay, there is more to the story. In this case, we were able to separate variables, so to speak. We were able to take the known things to one side, the unknown things on another side, and simply integrate both sides. This is a very fortunate circumstance. It is not always this way. Yeah. So the possibility of reducing differential equations to quadrature is the holy grail of subjects like mechanics. It is not always so easy to do. In this case, in this kinematical problem, it was possible. It is not possible in the dynamical problem in general, as we will describe. So that is somewhat of a general remark. You will understand what I mean as we go along, I hope. So in the remaining 1 minute, I will simply go through a simple example. A simple example is that of uniform acceleration. Namely, one where the acceleration vector is a constant vector. In this case, we can write down the velocity as a function of time explicitly. I can perform this integral because a is a constant vector. It comes out of the integral and you get only t minus t naught upon performing the integration. And so v of t is equal to v of t naught plus t minus t naught a. Now we simply integrate this once again to get r. It's the integral of this. So there's of course the constant of integration, which is r of t naught. Then integrating v of t naught, which is again a constant, we will get t minus t naught times v of t naught. Then t times a is a constant. So integrating t, you get t squared upon 2 evaluated at t naught and t. So that gives you this term. And finally, the minus t naught a gives you minus t naught a. Right? So this is easy enough to do. And for the case of constant acceleration, we have solved the kinematical problem and got an explicit formula for the trajectory. Okay, so this is a formula for the trajectory. Given the acceleration, the initial location, and the initial velocity. Okay. So it is good to observe what data is needed to solve this kinematical problem. This is, of course, a familiar formula. It will look even more familiar to you if you take T0 to be 0. It is often possible to choose the origin of time, namely when my clock says 0 to be 0, T0 equal to 0, in which case several terms go away. Yeah, and you get R of t is simply R of T0 plus TV of T0 plus half T squared A. Okay. It is worth noting that this formula only applies to the case of constant acceleration. Otherwise, it is. Yeah. So yes. So anyway, so I hope this was fairly straightforward what we have done. But it is important to understand the terminology. What we mean by kinematics, namely the passage from a prescribed acceleration to determining the velocity and position, whereas dynamics is something quite different. It is determining the acceleration, in fact, determining the trajectory as a whole from the forces. All right. Yeah, so now I have a question here. Shubh to everyone says, sir, your clock always says 9:41 and it also says 9 January. Yes, this is very sad. I don't know how to fix this. Yeah, I will have to do something about it. You are quite right. But please don't mind it. We will fix this soon enough, hopefully. Any other questions? Yeah, Shakti Chauhan has raised his hand.
Sorry, it was my mistake. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Yes, indeed, it was a joke. Yes, I did get the joke. Yeah. So yeah, but more seriously, we do have a choice of origin of time, and sadly, I have chosen it as 9:41 a.m. on 6th of January. I don't know which year. Maybe I don't even know if it's this year. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah, so one important thing, please do submit your answer sheets for problem set 1. It is due tomorrow evening. And please do name your submission file in the manner I have specified. First, give your roll number, BMC20 something, hyphen your name, like Shakti hyphen Chauhan, and finally, CM1P1. So this will be extremely helpful to us because we are receiving a large number of submissions and it is difficult to handle many files if they are all named in different ways which do not identify the author. Please also write your name on the paper before scanning it. You are also free to use LaTeX to type up your solutions. And those who have used some other manner of naming their files, I will return the submission and request you to please update the name. I will do that soon enough. I request you to please do that. Otherwise, it will be difficult for us to handle all these answer sheets. Okay.
Sir, can you repeat the name of the PDF file again?
Yeah, okay. I send this information by email. So what I would like you to do is something of this sort: BMC202144 hyphen Govind Krishna hyphen CM1P1. Okay, so this way we know your name, we know your roll number, and we know that it is problem set 1 of classical mechanics 1. It will help us a lot in handling the submissions. I hope that answers your question. By the way, who asked?
Yes, sir, it's answer. And my name is Shoham Chatterjee.
Okay, yes, Shoham. All right. Yeah, I have one more question from somebody. Shakti Chauhan says, means we can't generally solve differential equation by simply converting to integration. That is absolutely right. Given a differential equation, It cannot be solved simply by some integration. There is more involved. Then we have several more questions. Let me go through slowly. You will see that shortly. Anand Balivada asks, I mean, we can't symbolically integrate most functions either way, either anyway, laughing out loud. This is a different matter. Okay, I do wish to make a distinction between whether it is possible to integrate a function using elementary functions or known functions. That is still a process of integration. That is the process of quadrature. The distinction I am making is between solving a differential equation and evaluating integrals. Sadly, it is not possible to reduce the solution of many differential equations to evaluation of integrals. This is the essential difficulty which I want to point out. We will say more about it. The difference you are pointing out is between functions which you know how to integrate and functions you don't know how to integrate in terms of familiar functions. Okay. Now, next question is from Milan. Sir, you mentioned that you can't reduce general problem to quadrature. What does that mean physically? It means that physical systems can behave in manners different from regular motion. It admits the possibility of complicated motion. It admits the possibility of chaos. So this impossibility of reducing the solution of the equations of motion of a system to quadrature is in many deep ways related to the myriad variety of motion that physical systems can display. In those cases that it can be reduced to quadrature, the motion happens to be relatively simple. They are called integrable systems. And in those cases where you cannot reduce it to quadrature, typically involves something more complicated, and some of those systems are what we call chaotic. So this is a very, very rough distinction I am making, but there is a deep significance to this impossibility to reduce your differential equations to quadrature.
Sir, but like, what's the significance, like, in the difference of reducing it to quadrature versus just having a numerical scheme that can approximate it? Because I've also heard about, like, there are, like, for example, like the n-body problem system, right? Like, you can technically write a numerical scheme which computes it with like a relatively small error, but it's still not considered integrable in the sense that, like, you just mentioned.
You do raise a good point. Yes, it is possible through numerical schemes to integrate equations of motion. That is not what I am referring to. I think we need examples to discuss this in more concrete terms, and we shall do that at some other stage. But you are quite right. It is possible to reduce equations, differential equations, to numerical integration. That is not quite what I mean by quadrature, because this numerical integration is only over a infinitesimal instant of time. You see, okay, so I think this requires a little bit more discussion, but the point is that suppose you have an equation x dot is equal to okay, I think this is not something I should be discussing here and at this stage. Let us first introduce Newton's equations and then through examples describe this difference. It is true that numerical integration does allow you to solve any differential equation approximately. That is not the same as reducing the solution for finite times to quadrature. Numerical integration goes through infinitesimal times, performing one integration for each instant of time, so to speak, infinitesimal instant of time. That is not quite this, and then you do several such integrations and get the solution over moderate or long times. So it is not a single integration that gives you the solution over long times. So there is really a difference here. Numerical integration is not the same as a single quadrature. It is a succession of several quadratures over short instants of time, which gives you an approximate solution. I hope that at least partly addresses your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You are welcome, Anand Balivada. Now we have question. Okay, Milan, I think I addressed. Anand asks, approximation is the way of life. Well, that is true. Yes, approximate solutions are very valuable. We gain lots of insights. I shall quote Paul Dirac, who was in a seminar and giving a seminar, and somebody stated something like this, and his answer was, or rather his remark was, that is a statement, not a question, and he simply went on. So anyway, this is a statement from Anand Balivada that approximation is a way of life, but I do agree. Okay. Now Soham Chatterjee says, yeah, in second order linear differential equation, there is many pre-processes involved. Okay, I think we need to write down those equations to understand what is at stake. Yeah, second order differential equations are not always reducible to quadrature. Yeah, I mean, yes, and the matter also concerns whether it's linear and non-linear and so on. Yeah. So there are issues there. I think we need examples to talk more concretely. Shubranil Dev says, that's the most engineering thing I have ever heard. Okay, I don't know who he has heard this from. Do you want to clarify? Shubranil Dev.
No, sir, I was talking about the approximation is the way of life.
Ah, okay, okay. All right. Well, I would like to point out that approximation pervades mathematics and physics, not just engineering. And many of the deep results of mathematics are obtained by successive approximation. Yeah, so it is everywhere. Milan says, thank you, sir. And Ishan Verma asks, what if we approximate the integral using numerical methods? Then we approximate the function of the numerically solved integral using regression or similar procedures. Yes, yes, that is quite right. I think we have addressed that. Numerical schemes are welcome and they give enormous insight. But that is not quite the same as doing a quadrature. Okay, any other questions at this stage?
Professor, I had two small questions.
Yeah, may I know who is speaking?
This is Gautam, sir.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. So if we had, going back to our earlier discussion about circular motion, if we had non-uniform circular motion,
yes,
then the acceleration and the velocity cannot always be orthogonal, right? There have to be some points where they are non-orthogonal. Is that correct?
Acceleration and so yes, the velocity need not be uniform. That is true. The velocity, no, see, the velocity always points azimuthally, tangentially, just that its length changes with time. Yes, now, okay, so what are you asking? So, okay, the velocity is always tangential to the circle. Now, you are asking about the acceleration, that is v dot, yes. Now, and okay, I will, I think I will address this question next time because we are seriously out of time. And but I will definitely talk about this.
Okay.
You are talking about non-uniform circular motion and the relation of acceleration, velocity, how are they orthogonal or not, and the like, as I understand.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sure. We will definitely take this up. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I had one more very quick question though.
Okay.
That's about the assignment.
Yes.
If I wanted to write on a tablet and send that as a PDF, would that be okay as well?
Yeah, as long as it's legible, and we want small file sizes.
Okay.
Please save it in a small file size, compress it online if you need to. Please don't send us large file sizes. But it does need to be legible. Tablet is fine, LaTeX is fine, paper, pencil is also fine.
Okay, got it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Thank you for all of your attention. Let us now break for lunch, and we will reconvene on Thursday morning at 11:50. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.